Okay, so for those of us who haven't encountered this term before, can you break it down? What exactly is spiritual bypassing? I get that it's about using faith to avoid the hard stuff,
Right.
but I'm guessing it's a bit more complicated than that.
It is. It is. It's definitely got more layers to it than just slapping a Bible verse on something and calling it a day. That Psychology Today article you sent, it defines spiritual bypassing as
Welcome to the Clarence Stowers Leadership Podcast, a podcast about becoming 1% better every day. And now your host, yours truly, Clarence Stowers.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Clarence Stowers Leadership Podcast. Well, it's all about getting 1% better every day. I'm your host, Clarence Edward Stowers Jr., and today we're tackling a topic that's heavy on many hearts right now, the emotional fallout from the recent presidential election. No doubt, it's been a roller coaster of a season, hasn't it? And whether your chosen candidate won or lost, it's likely you're feeling some kind of emotional aftershock. Maybe it's disappointment, frustration, anger, or a sense of weariness, and that's okay. We're going to acknowledge those real, raw feelings today. But here's the thing. As people of faith, it's easy to fall into the trap of spiritual bypassing. We try to slap a God's got it Band-Aid on our pain and move on. We tell ourselves God has a plan or his ways are higher than ours. And while those statements may be true, sometimes we use them to avoid dealing with the messy, uncomfortable emotions bubbling beneath the surface. Check this out. Lean in. That's not true healing. That's suppression. And in this episode, we're going to learn how to move past spiritual bypassing and allow God to develop or to do the deep work of healing in our hearts. Now, here's what I'd like for you to do. Here's how to get the most out of this episode. Number one, grab a pen and paper or something to write with, something to write on. Because our hosts are going to share some practical insights and action steps from Scripture, as well as from my own personal experience that I encourage you to write down. Secondly, in addition to grabbing pen and paper, open your heart. Be willing to examine your own responses to the election. Are you truly processing your feelings, or are you trying to quickly cover them up with spiritual platitudes? And finally, in addition to grabbing pen and paper and opening your heart, finally, be ready to take action. Healing is not a passive process. Our hosts will talk about specific steps you can take to move towards genuine peace and wholeness. Here's the thing. I believe God's love is big enough to hold both our pain and our faith. I'm going to say that once again. I believe that God's love is big enough to hold our pain and our faith. And I'm excited to explore that truth with you today. Before we dive in, I want to remind you that you're not alone in this. We are a community here. We're a tribe. And we can support each other on this journey of healing. Are you all ready to dive in? Well, I'll see you on the inside.
Wow, you guys really piled on the reading this time. Looks like we're tackling some pretty heavy stuff today. You know, how we deal with all those tough emotions, especially like when faith is part of the picture. We've got bits and pieces from like a guide to scripture, that article on post-election blues, even a whole sermon transcript from Pastor Clarence Stowers Jr.
Sounds intense.
And then there's this blog post about spiritual bypassing. That one really kind of jumped out at me. It just feels so relevant right now, you know?
It is, yeah. It's a term you're hearing more and more these days. And for good reason, I think.
Totally. Okay, so for those of us who like haven't encountered this term before, can you break it down? What exactly is spiritual bypassing? I get that it's about using faith to like avoid the hard stuff.
Right.
But I'm guessing it's a bit more complicated than that.
It is. It is. It's definitely got more layers to it than just slapping a Bible verse on something and calling it a day. That Psychology Today article you sent, it defines spiritual bypassing as, well, hold on, let me get it right. Using spiritual ideas or practices to avoid facing uncomfortable emotions and experiences.
Okay.
But it's the why behind that that's really fascinating.
So why do we do it then? Like, is it all just about seeking comfort? Or is there something deeper going on?
Comfort's definitely a part of it, for sure. Like wanting to ease pain, that's natural, right?
Of course, yeah.
But I think it also ties into this whole idea that, you know, we have to project a certain image of spiritual strength.
Right.
Like if you're truly faithful, you shouldn't be struggling, that kind of thing.
Yeah, totally. Like there's this unspoken pressure to be that positive, faith-filled person, the one everyone else can lean on.
Right.
And if you're not feeling it, you just paste on a smile and say, God's got this.
Exactly. And that can be incredibly isolating.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the truth is, everyone struggles, you know.
Right.
Even Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, he wrestled with doubt and fear. All those sources you've pulled together, they highlight this very human side of faith.
Oh, right.
It's not about denying our emotions, but about bringing them to God, honestly.
That makes me think about that post-election blues article.
Yeah.
Pastor Stowers, he talks about like scrolling through social media and seeing all those God is in control posts.
Yeah.
But underneath, people are actually hurting and grieving. It's almost like we're, I don't know, bypassing the very real need to actually process those complex emotions.
It is. It's a really classic example of spiritual bypassing in action.
Right.
And while those sentiments, they might come from a place of good intentions,
Yeah,
you know,
sure.
they can actually hinder the healing process. It's a bit like telling someone with a broken leg to just walk it off.
Ouch. Yeah.
You're ignoring the reality of their pain and the fact that they need proper care.
So what are the dangers of just slapping on that spiritual Band-Aid, so to speak? I mean, is it really more than just, you know, delaying dealing with our feelings?
Well, the problem is burying emotions. It doesn't make them disappear, does it? They just sort of fester and can pop up in all these unhealthy ways.
Right, yeah.
Pastor Stowers, he had this great line in his sermon.
Oh, yeah.
He said, if you bury the pain, you also bury the breakthrough.
Wow, that is powerful. So it's like by trying to avoid the hard stuff, we're actually, we're blocking ourselves from real growth and transformation.
Exactly. It's like trying to build a dam to hold back a river. Eventually, all that pressure, it's got to go somewhere. And these sources are pointing to a different approach altogether.
Okay.
One where we actually face our emotions head on, allowing ourselves to feel, you know, the full range of what it means to be human, even the difficult parts.
So how do we actually do that? If we're so used to pushing down those messy feelings, how do we even begin to, I don't know, unpack them? I'm guessing that's where this whole authenticity piece comes in, right?
Authenticity is key. Yeah. It's about acknowledging and honoring like our true selves, flaws and all. And that includes our emotions. It's about bringing those messy, complicated feelings to the table, you know, both with ourselves and with God.
I like that, bringing them to the table, like inviting them in for a conversation instead of pretending they don't exist.
Exactly. And that's where, you know, scripture can actually be incredibly helpful.
Okay.
Often, it gets used to justify bypassing, but if we really look closely, we see the Bible is full of these raw, honest expressions of human emotion.
Right.
The Psalms, for example, they're a treasure trove of lament, grief, anger, doubt.
It's true.
Even Jesus himself, you know, he expressed deep anguish in the Garden of Gethsemane.
Yeah. It's like we're not meant to be robots, even in our faith, right? We're designed to experience this whole range of emotions.
Precisely. And when we deny that, we deny a fundamental part of who we are. We create this disconnect within ourselves and with God.
So if we want to start embracing this authenticity, where do we even begin? I mean, I'm guessing it's more than just deciding to feel our feelings.
Yeah.
There got to be some practical steps involved, right?
Absolutely. And that's what's so great about the sources you've gathered.
Yeah.
They offer some really practical guidance for navigating this whole journey.
Okay, lay it on me. What are those actionable steps?
Well, first, we have to acknowledge that we're all on a spectrum with this, right?
Right.
Some of us might be knee-deep in spiritual bypassing, while others, just dabble a little now and then.
Sure.
The first step, though, is awareness. Noticing when we're doing it.
So paying attention to those moments when we're tempted to slap on that spiritual Band-Aid instead of actually addressing the root of the issue?
Exactly. And it might feel uncomfortable at first, but that discomfort, it's actually a good sign. It means we're starting to move past those old patterns, those ingrained habits.
Okay, so we're aware. What's next?
Next, we need to start cultivating a practice of emotional honesty.
Mm.
And this involves getting curious about our feelings.
Okay.
Like, what are we actually experiencing?
Mm.
Where are we feeling it in our bodies?
Yeah.
What thoughts are coming up?
It's like we become, detectives of our own inner world.
Exactly. And as we investigate, we need to practice self-compassion.
Right.
It's okay if we're not experts at this right away. We're learning a new way of being.
Right. So no beating ourselves up if we catch ourselves bypassing. Just notice it, be kind to ourselves, and try again.
Exactly. It's a process, not a destination.
Yeah.
And it's a journey worth taking. Because on the other side of that discomfort, well, there's a whole world of freedom and authentic connection waiting to be discovered.
That sounds pretty amazing, but I have to admit, it also sounds a bit daunting.
Yeah.
Are there any tools or resources that can help us, navigate this process?
Oh, there are. There definitely are. And we'll dive into those a bit more in the next episode. But for now, just start by paying attention to those moments when you feel that urge to bypass, right?
Mm-hmm.
And ask yourself, what am I really feeling here? What might it look like to bring that feeling to God honestly without trying to, fix it or explain it away?
That's a great place to start. I have a feeling this is going to be a deep dive in every sense of the word.
It definitely will be. And I think you'll be amazed at what you discover along the way. As we're unpacking this whole idea of bringing our whole selves to God, I keep coming back to the role of Scripture. It's funny, in a way, because sometimes people use the Bible itself to justify bypassing,
Oh, absolutely. I've definitely heard those well-meaning but kind of dismissive phrases God wouldn't give you more than you can handle, or just give it to God.
Yeah. It's like those verses, they become this shield, right, protecting us from actually feeling the weight of our struggles. But it also creates this impossible standard. If we're truly faithful, we should be able to just power through anything,
Right, exactly. But that totally contradicts the raw honesty we see all throughout the Bible. Think about the Psalms, right? I mean, they're filled with these cries of lament, anger, even doubt. It's like the psalmists are giving us this blueprint for how to bring our full range of emotions to God.
Exactly. And that's something that the guide to Scripture you shared, it really emphasizes that, the importance of context.
Right.
Take those Psalms, for example. I mean, many of them were written during times of intense suffering and exile. Right?
Yeah.
It wasn't about pretending everything was fine. It was about pouring their hearts out to God.
That makes so much sense. It's like those raw, honest expressions of pain. They were actually a form of deep connection with God.
Yeah.
Not a sign of weak faith, but a testament to their trust in his presence, even in the midst of darkness.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that's a message that resonates, across time and cultures. It's a reminder that faith isn't about denying our humanity. It's about embracing it, even the messy parts.
So if we're going to reclaim this idea of authentic faith, how do we approach Scripture in a way that honors both our intellectual understanding and our emotional experiences?
I think it starts with curiosity. Instead of just accepting a surface level interpretation, we can dig a little deeper, ask questions about the historical context, the author's intent, the cultural nuances, all that stuff.
So not just reading the words, but really engaging with the text, trying to understand the heart behind it.
Exactly. And that can lead to some really profound aha moments. You suddenly realize a verse you always interpreted one way actually has a completely different meaning when you consider the context.
Oh, that's happened to me before. It's like unlocking this hidden layer of truth that completely shifts your perspective.
Right. And that's what makes Scripture so rich and engaging. It's this living, breathing text that speaks to us in new ways as we grow and evolve.
It's like having a conversation with someone you love. The more you get to know them, the deeper your understanding becomes.
I love that analogy. And just like any good conversation, it involves active listening, asking thoughtful questions, and being open to new perspectives.
So it's not about finding the right interpretation, but about engaging with the text in a way that's meaningful and transformative for us.
Exactly. And when we approach Scripture with that kind of openness, well, we discover it's not a rule book for suppressing our emotions.
Right.
It's a guide for navigating the, complexities of the human experience in all its messy glory.
It's like the Bible becomes this companion on our journey, not a judge or a critic.
I like that. A companion that walks alongside us, offering comfort and guidance, but also challenging us to grow and evolve.
Okay, so we're engaging with Scripture in this more authentic way, but what about the emotional wounds that have already been inflicted by those misinterpretations? How do we help people who've been told that their pain is a sign of weak faith or that they just need to, pray harder?
That's such an important question. And it requires a multifaceted approach, I think. First, we need to create spaces where people feel safe to share their stories, to express their doubts and their pain, without fear of judgment.
So fostering this culture of empathy and compassion, where vulnerability is welcomed and honored.
Exactly. And that starts with listening, really listening, with our hearts as well as our ears,
Right.
putting aside our own assumptions and agendas, and simply being present with someone in their pain.
It's about holding space for their emotions, letting them know they're not alone, that their experiences are valid.
Precisely. And from there, we can start to, gently challenge those harmful interpretations of Scripture, not by dismissing their beliefs, of course,
Right.
but by offering alternative perspectives, highlighting those passages that speak to, the full spectrum of human emotion.
So it's about helping them see that faith isn't about denying their humanity, but about embracing it, even the messy parts.
Exactly. And as they begin to see that, they can start to, reclaim their own stories, to rewrite the narratives that have been holding them back.
It's like they're reclaiming their spiritual inheritance, the right to be fully human with all their complexities and contradictions and still be deeply loved and accepted by God.
That's beautifully said. And it's a truth that sets people free.
This whole conversation has been so eye-opening. I'm realizing that, my own understanding of faith has been shaped by some of these bypassing tendencies, It's like I've been trying to fit myself into this mold that was never meant for me.
That's a really common experience. We're often taught that faith is about conformity, about fitting in, about having all the right answers.
Right.
But true faith, it's about transformation. It's about becoming, more fully ourselves, more fully human, more fully alive.
And that involves embracing all of who we are, even the parts that we'd rather hide or deny.
Exactly. And that's where true healing begins.
Okay, so we've talked about the importance of approaching Scripture with this open heart and mind, about creating safe spaces for people to share their struggles, about reclaiming our stories. But what does that actually look like in practice? How do we move from theory to action?
That's a great question. And it's one that we'll explore in more detail in our next episode.
Okay, I'm ready to dive deeper. I have a feeling this is where things get really practical and transformative.
It definitely is. And I think you'll be amazed at the power of authentic faith, to heal, to connect, and to transform us from the inside out.
So we've been unpacking some pretty heavy stuff, haven't we? Spiritual bypassing, authentic faith, the way our emotions and beliefs all kind of get mixed up together.
Yeah, we have.
It's been eye-opening, to say the least. But now I'm wondering, how do we actually move beyond just understanding all these concepts?
Right.
How do we actually start living them out?
That's the real question, isn't it?
Yeah.
The million-dollar question. And, I think the answer might be in shifting our focus a bit. Less about individual transformation and more about building a culture that really supports authenticity. What do you think?
So less about fixing ourselves and more about creating those spaces where, vulnerability is just the norm.
Exactly. Think about Pastor Stowers, encouraging his congregation to share their honest feelings after the election.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a powerful example of what it looks like to build a community that really embraces the full range of human emotion, don't you think?
It's like saying, it's okay to not be okay. We're all in this together. But I imagine that takes a lot of courage,
Oh, it does.
both for the person sharing and for the people receiving those raw emotions.
Absolutely. And that's where this whole concept of like deep listening comes in. Instead of just offering platitudes or trying to, fix things.
Right.
We can just be there, be present with someone's pain. Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is just hold space for another person's experience.
That makes me think of that verse from 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 7. It says, cast all your anxieties on him because he cares for you.
Yeah.
But it kind of implies that someone's there to receive that anxiety, right? Someone who can hold it with care and compassion.
That's a beautiful connection. It really highlights the fact that, authentic faith, it's not just about this like individual relationship with God. It's about living out that faith in community, in relationship with each other.
Yeah. It's like we're called to be, I don't know, these living embodiments of God's grace and compassion for one another. Which, sounds lovely in theory, but how do we actually do that? Especially when we're so used to spiritual bypassing as like a defense mechanism.
Well, it starts with small steps.
Okay.
Maybe it's resisting that urge to offer a quick fix when a friend shares a struggle.
Right.
Maybe it's asking a follow-up question instead of just saying, I'll pray for you. Or maybe, it's sharing our own struggles authentically, creating that space for others to do the same.
So leading by example, modeling that vulnerability we want to see in the world.
Exactly. And remember, we're not striving for perfection here. We're all works in progress.
Yeah.
The goal is just to keep moving towards greater authenticity, both in ourselves and, in how we interact with other people.
Okay, so let's say I'm trying to have this conversation with someone who's like deep in spiritual bypassing mode. They're shutting down their feelings with all those, God has a plan type responses. How do I engage with them in a way that like honors their experience without getting sucked into that bypassing vortex myself?
First, remember, you can't force anyone to change, right? Approach the conversation with compassion and curiosity. Instead of trying to correct their theology, just focus on validating their feelings.
So saying something like, it sounds like you're going through a really tough time. I can't imagine how difficult that must be.
Exactly. Meet them right where they are emotionally. And then, you might gently invite them to explore those feelings a little bit further. You could say, what's it like for you to be feeling this way? Or what are some of the thoughts and emotions that are, coming up for you?
So not telling them how to feel, but creating a safe space for them to like process those emotions without judgment?
Precisely. And if they resist, don't push it. Sometimes just offering a listening ear and a non-judgmental presence, that's enough.
It's like that saying, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
And, sometimes sharing our own experiences can be helpful too.
Right.
It creates this sense of shared humanity, a feeling of we're in this together.
So saying something like, I've been there too. It's okay to not be okay. It's okay to feel all these messy emotions, even when we have faith.
Exactly. It's about normalizing those human experiences and breaking down that stigma around struggling.
This is giving me so much to think about. It's like we're being called to be, I don't know, revolutionaries of the heart, challenging all those like ingrained patterns of spiritual bypassing and creating a culture where authenticity just reigns.
I love that image.
Yeah.
And it's a revolution that starts within each one of us. As we embrace our own authenticity, as we learn to hold space for other people's experiences, as we create communities where vulnerability is welcomed and celebrated.
Yeah.
That's how we start to change the world, one heart at a time.
That's a beautiful vision. And it feels, I don't know, both empowering and hopeful.
It is. And I think it's a vision worth fighting for, don't you?
This deep dive has been incredible. I mean, we've covered so much ground, from like the psychological roots of spiritual bypassing to the power of scripture to all those practical tips for embracing authenticity to this vision of, a world where vulnerability is just the norm.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's been a rich and challenging conversation, and I'm really grateful to have shared this space with you.
Likewise. So as we wrap up, is there like one final thought you'd like to leave our listeners with? Something for them to, I don't know, ponder as they continue this whole exploration on their own?
Here's a question I'd like you to sit with. If even Jesus, the embodiment of God's love, needed to express his pain and seek support, what does that tell us about the nature of true faith and the power of vulnerability?
That's a powerful question. It reminds us that, embracing our full humanity with all its complexities, it's not a weakness.
Right.
It's a strength. It's a path to deeper connection with ourselves, with God, and with each other. It's a reminder that we're not meant to do this alone. We need each other.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll leave you to continue your own deep dive into authentic faith. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep diving deep.
You've been listening to the Clarence Stowers Leadership Podcast. Join us next time for more insights on becoming 1% better each day and leveling up in all areas of life.